Welcome to your deep dive. Mental health, right? It's everywhere you look these days, but you really sent over some fascinating stuff this time around about what's happening in the UK, and honestly, I'm kind of hooked already. It feels different, like a real shift is happening over there.
It really does, yeah. And you're right, it's not just the same old mental health matters message we hear everywhere else. It seems like the UK is actually trying to walk the walk, really experiment with new approaches.
Okay, I'm all in on that. So what makes this different? What's going on in the UK that's unique, at least from what you've seen in the materials I sent over?
Well, one of the biggest things that jumped out at me was just how much of it focuses on what they call lived experience. You've got actual people sharing their stories, their struggles, navigating the UK system. It's not just academics or therapists weighing in.
That's interesting because, yeah, that's got to be powerful hearing it straight from the source. Did any of those stories particularly stand out to you?
There was this one, I think it was from The Guardian. It was an interview with a young woman. She'd been in and out of NHS mental health services. And her story was really moving. But it was more than that. It wasn't just a personal story. They wove in the realities of the system, like, wait times, access to therapy, even like the postcode lottery of care in the UK.
Wow, yeah, because it's one thing to talk about these issues, right? Like theoretically, but when you hear it from someone who's actually living it, it hits differently, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, it really does. And, speaking of impact, there was another article, I think it was from the BBC, about this new campaign from Mind, the charity.
Right, mind, yeah.
Is specifically targeting men in construction, apparently. It's one of the demographics with really high suicide rates. And their approach is interesting. They're training mental health first aiders, people who are already part of that world, going into pubs, even using sports metaphors to make it all a bit less, off-putting.
I love that. Meeting people where they already are, both literally and figuratively, right? So it's not just about awareness at this point. They're trying to get into the nitty-gritty of what actually helps. How do we make support accessible?
That's it. And I even saw one article, I can't remember which one now, but they use this phrase, practical optimism.
Practical optimism. I like that.
It's not sugarcoating the really serious challenges, but actually looking at what is working and how do we replicate that? How do we scale it up?
Okay, so we're not just talking about awareness, breaking down stigma, though that's obviously still huge. This is about a fundamental shift in how the UK is approaching mental health support, right?
Exactly. And, one of the key areas where this is playing out is in the workplace. You flagged a few reports on this, and honestly, there's some really interesting stuff there.
Ooh, okay, yeah, tell me more, because the workplace is it's where a lot of us spend most of our lives, right? So how's this all playing out in that context?
Well, this one study from King's College London, they really dug into the economic impact of poor mental health in the UK. And the numbers kind of mind-blowing, honestly. They're talking billions of pounds lost annually just from decreased productivity, people missing work, employees leaving.
Wow, yeah, those are serious numbers.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting.
I do love it. Here's where it gets interesting.
Hit me with it.
So they highlighted all these companies, UK companies, doing these innovative programs, like mental health days, but not just one-offs, like built into their benefits packages. Training managers to actually recognize early signs of burnout or stress in their teams, even bringing therapists on site. They're starting to get it investing in your employees' mental health. It's not just the right thing to do anymore, it's good business.
It's like that old saying, right? Take care of your employees and they'll take care of your business. But this feels like it goes even deeper than that. Like some of these UK companies are actually, I don't know, are they trying to change the culture around mental health at work? It seems like it. And another thing that's interesting, it's not just coming from the top down either. A lot of your sources talked about the role of employees themselves, like these grassroots initiatives.
Oh, really? Like what?
Like, mental health support groups within companies, peer-to-peer mentoring. I even saw a few things about just creating spaces where people feel comfortable talking openly.
Yeah.
It's like they're saying it's okay to not be okay, which is, I don't know, kind of refreshing, right?
It is. It feels very, very, I don't know the word, proactive. Like not waiting until someone's at a crisis point, but creating a culture where it's okay to talk about it before it gets to that.
Exactly. And, that actually makes me think about something else. Remember earlier we were talking about lived experience and how important that is?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, it seems like that's actually influencing how mental health support is being delivered too, at least in the UK.
Oh, interesting. Okay. How so?
So one of the articles you shared, I think it was from the Mental Health Foundation, they were talking about the rise of, get this, peer support workers.
Peer support workers. Now, what is that exactly?
So these are people who have their own, like, lived experience with mental health challenges, right?
Hmm.
And they're actually being trained using that experience to support others.
Oh, wow. So it's like having someone who's been there, who gets it, who can offer support from a place of real understanding.
Exactly. And the article, what they were saying was, this can be particularly helpful for people who maybe don't feel comfortable talking to, more traditional authority figures like
Yeah.
doctors, therapists, that kind of thing. There's a level of empathy there that's really unique.
I bet. Gosh, it makes you wonder why this kind of peer support isn't more widespread, you know?
Doesn't it? And that actually brings up a really important point that came up in a few of the things you sent over the funding challenges. The UK system, it's great that they're trying all these new things, but the reality is resources are stretched pretty thin.
Yeah, that's something we hear a lot, unfortunately. But it sounds like even with those limitations, there's still this real drive to be creative, to make the most of what they have.
For sure, yeah. It's inspiring. And, we've been really focused on the big picture stuff, the system, the initiatives. But I think it's important to remember, individual action still matters too.
Because at the end of the day, even with all the best programs in the world, it often comes down to those one-on-one interactions, those moments of human connection.
100%. I mean, so much of what we've been talking about comes back to this, right? How can we show up for each other in a way that actually makes a difference?
So let's get practical. Let's say someone listening right now, they have someone in their life who's struggling. What can they actually do? I mean, beyond just being there for them, because I think we all want to do that, but sometimes it's like, how? How do you actually do that?
Right. It's not always obvious. There's this one article you sent, I think it was Psychology Today, and they had this really great analogy. They said supporting someone with their mental health is like being a Sherpa, not a savior.
Oh, Sherpa, not a savior. I like that. What does that mean exactly?
So it means you're not trying to carry their burden for them. You're not trying to fix their problems, but you're there to guide them, to offer support and encouragement as they figure things out themselves.
Yeah, you're walking alongside them, not carrying them. I love that.
And they actually gave some really practical tips, which I thought was great. Like one of them, this one really stuck with me, was the importance of asking open-ended questions.
Yo, okay. As opposed to...
So instead of just saying, are you okay? Because let's be honest, sometimes that can feel a bit, I don't know, loaded.
Yeah, it's like you're almost expecting a fine.
Exactly. So instead of that, try something like, how are you feeling today? Or what's been on your mind lately?
It's about giving them space to actually share, without feeling pressured.
Exactly. Oh, and this is important. Another tip they gave, be mindful of your own energy. It's okay to set boundaries if you need to. You can't pour from an empty cup,
That is so important. And I think sometimes people forget that wanting to be there for someone, it doesn't mean you have to sacrifice your own well-being in the process. And, actually, speaking of well-being, this whole conversation has really got me thinking about that, about the importance of taking care of our own mental health, right?
100%. You can't really separate the two, can you? Our own well-being, it directly impacts our ability to support others.
Totally. And thinking back to the UK again, I remember one of the articles mentioned something called the 5 ways to well-being, like these evidence-based actions that are supposed to, boost mental well-being.
Yes. I remember that. I thought that was so interesting. Do you remember what they were?
I think so. Let me see. Okay, so it's connect, be active, take notice, keep learning, and give. Did I get them all?
You got them. And what I loved about it is they're all things we can actually do. It doesn't matter what our circumstances are. Those are all within our control, which is kind of empowering, right?
It's like a little toolkit we can all use. I love that.
And it goes beyond just individual benefit, too. The article talked about how some places in the UK are taking those 5 ways, and they're applying them in communities, workplaces, even schools.
It's like, what were you saying earlier, weaving it into the fabric of life.
Exactly.
Not just the thing you deal with when it's a problem, but like a constant,
Absolutely. It's kind of amazing when you think about how far we've come, right? Like the conversations around mental health.
From like hushed whispers to something we're talking about openly.
I know. And I think what's happening in the UK, at least from the stuff you sent over, it feels different. There's a momentum, like a willingness to experiment, to actually put mental well-being front and center.
Yeah, it's like they're saying, okay, we've talked about the problems enough. Now how do we fix them?
Exactly. It's not even just about fixing things that are broken. It's about how do we create a system, a society where this is just valued, where mental health is supported from the ground up.
A world where it's okay to not be okay,
Yeah.
where there's help and hope for anyone who needs it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And you know what? I think that's a message we need to be shouting from the rooftops. It's okay to not be okay.
Okay, so where do we go from here? What can our listeners, especially those in the UK, what can they actually do with all of this?
Right. That's the big question, isn't it? We've talked about all this amazing stuff happening, but where do we even start?
I know, it can feel kind of overwhelming, right? Like, how do we take all this big picture stuff and make it real in our own lives?
Exactly. So for someone listening right now, maybe they're feeling inspired, maybe a little overwhelmed. What's a good first step? If you want to actually start prioritizing mental well-being, whether it's your own or, supporting someone else, what do we do?
Well, here in the UK, honestly, you're in a good spot. I mean, all those resources you shared, that's a great place to start. Go back through them. But this time, look for something specific.
Yeah.
Like, is there an organization that really stood out to you, a group you could join? Or maybe like that Mind campaign with the construction workers, maybe that sparked an idea for how to reach out to someone in your own life. It's about finding that thing that clicks, that feels, I don't know, doable.
Exactly. And, sometimes just talking about it can make a difference. Share what you learned from this deep dive. Tell a friend, a family member. You never know who might be struggling silently or who might be, relieved to hear someone else talking about this
It's
stuff.
like planting little seeds of awareness, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And hey, if you're feeling really ambitious, think about how you could get more involved. Could you volunteer somewhere? Could you push for better mental health support at your work? Even just, sharing resources online. Little things can make a difference.
It all adds up, right? It's a collective effort, building a world where this stuff matters.
100%. And, it's important to remember this is a marathon, not a sprint. There are going to be good days and bad days, but just keep moving forward, even if it's just one tiny step at a time.
So well said. It feels like we've covered so much ground today, everything from like the reality on the ground in the UK to these bigger questions about, how we take care of each other, how we build a better future. Any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
I think the biggest thing I want people to take away from this is hope is real. Change is possible. And each one of us listening right now, we can be part of that change. Whether it's just, taking better care of yourself today or reaching out to someone who needs it, your actions, no matter how small they seem, they really can make a difference.
That is a beautiful note to end on. I love that. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with me. It's been eye-opening, inspiring, and I have a feeling this is just the beginning of a much bigger conversation.
I agree. I can't wait to see where we go from here.
To all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. And remember, you're not alone. Take care of yourselves and each other.